Let's be real, D&D combat kinda sucks. Rounds drag on, tensions fade, and your players end up more confused than excited. But here's the thing, the combat system makes us run combat the same every time. So today, I'm going to show you a few simple changes in DM strategy you can take for your combat to reach the next level without overhauling all the rules. Let's dive into it and level up your combat game. D&D combat often lacks tactical strategy. After the first round, it tends to devolve into something quite predictable. Players and the boss simply trade blows, rolling dice back and forth until one side drops. While this can still be fun, it often falls short of being as dynamic or exciting as it could be. To fix this, we need to do more than just throw stronger monsters at the player. We need to invest some time and thought in how we design the combat encounters. Starting with the battle map. A well-crafted battle map can drastically change the flow of combat and turn even a simple skirmish into an engaging, memorable experience. Think of every fight like a boss battle in a video game. Even a random encounter with a few goblins on the road can be made interesting with the right setup. The key is to give players more to consider than just hit the enemy. They should have to weigh their environment, positioning, and unique opportunities as much as they consider their attacks. For example, you might place a carriage in the middle of a road with some explosive cargo. That immediately changes the dynamic. Now, the players, and the goblins, have to decide whether to use the carriage as an advantage or avoid it entirely. Alternatively, maybe it's raining heavily, making the road muddy and slippery. Only the goblins with their clawed feet can move around, giving them the tactical edge in mobility. Now players need to think about how to mitigate their disadvantage. Do they find the high ground, use spells to control the environment, or take the risk of moving in the mud? These small details go a long way in keeping the combat fresh. A simple terrain feature like a narrow bridge, unstable ledges, or a patch of magical fog can give players a new puzzle to solve mid-battle. Will they take the risk of moving across dangerous terrain for a better position, or will they try to use it against their enemy? Every choice adds a layer of strategy to what might otherwise have been a straightforward fight. As a DM, these additions do a lot of heavy lifting. You don't need to overhaul the combat system or reinvent the wheel. You're just giving your players new tools to play with, where each combat encounter is much more about adapting to the situation than it is about raw numbers. The result, your players will start thinking differently in every combat scenario. They'll look for opportunities in their environment and strategize beyond just character abilities. This leads to combat that feels unique, tactical, and memorable, whether they're fighting a horde of goblins or a towering dragon. In combat, each class has its strengths, but there's always one reigning champion, spellcasters. Especially at high level, spellcasters tend to overshadow martial classes, whether it's through powerful area of effect spells like Fireball, or crowd control with Hold Person, or Polymorph. They often dominate the battlefield in ways that martial classes simply can't. This can leave some of the martial players feeling like they fall behind. They might feel pressured to min-max their stats just to keep up with the power curve. And if they don't, it can feel like they're wasting time in combat, contributing far less than their spell-slinging counterparts. One easy fix is to give your martial players more magic items. A well-placed +2 longsword, or a cloak of invisibility, can certainly help them hold their own in a fight. But I'm not the biggest fan of this solution. If you start giving out magic items to balance the martial classes, your spellcasters are going to want more too. Before you know it, everyone is loaded up with overpowered gear, and your game spirals into becoming an arms race, where combat becomes a matter of who has the best magical toys, rather than who is thinking strategically or playing their role well. Instead of escalating magic items, I prefer to address the fundamental issue by adjusting combat goals themselves. Instead of every fight being about who can deal the most damage, I introduce alternative objectives that play to the strength of different classes, especially martial ones. For example, maybe there's a massive energy source on the battlefield that needs to be shut down, a mad wizard siphoning power from an arcane device, and while the spellcasters are busy holding off the waves of enemies, the fighter and the rogue are the ones who rush in and destroy the device. This creates tension and gives non-spellcasters a crucial action-packed role to play. Another great scenario that could involve something like this is breaking the Lich's phylactery. The martial classes might be focused on smashing through the undead hordes, or even directly attacking the phylactery itself, while the spellcasters handle the crowd control or deal with the Lich's spells. Suddenly, the battlefield has layers of strategy and tension, where each class type contributes in meaningful ways, not just raw damage output. But giving the martial characters tasks like these, they don't need to compete with the spellcasters in terms of raw power. Instead, they have opportunities to be heroes in other ways. Whether it's using their strength to crush a key objectives, their agility to navigate tricky terrain, or their bravery to charge headlong into danger. It makes combat feel more balanced and dynamic because everyone has a role, even if they aren't casting Meteor Swarm. D&D's turn-based combat system is a staple of the game, but I have to admit, it's one of my least favorite parts of how combat plays out. While it does give everyone a chance to act, when you have a large party and they're up against a horde of enemies, it can make each round of combat drag on forever. When combat slows down like this, it's easy for players to lose focus. They might get distracted, start looking at their phones, or zone out altogether. By the time it's their turn again, they don't know what's going on, and they end up taking even longer to decide what they want to do because they haven't been following the action. This can lead to frustrating pauses between each player's turn and kill the momentum of what should be thrilling combat. A really fun way to get around this is by simplifying the turn structure. Instead of each player and enemy taking individual turns, try switching it to just 2 turns per combat round. One for the players and their allies, and one for the enemies. This way, everyone on the player's side takes their actions at the same time, followed by the enemies acting at the same time as well. This change does a couple great things for the pacing and the energy of the fight. First, it speeds things up dramatically. You're cutting down on waiting between turns, and all the players are engaged during the entire player phase because they are coordinating with each other and discussing strategies and planning their moves together. This keeps everyone invested in what's happening because the players need to stay engaged to respond to the enemies, move, and set up combo attacks with their allies. For example, the rogue might prepare a dash behind the enemy just as the fighter delivers a heavy strike, setting up a disadvantage sneak attack combo. Or you might get wild and memorable moments where the barbarian uses his action to hurl the rogue into combat, launching them towards the boss for a surprise attack. It also encourages teamwork. When all the players are acting at the same time, they have to communicate and plan together. It makes them feel like a real party working in tandem rather than a collection of individuals taking turns. You'll see more creative thinking from your group as they begin to think on how their abilities can work in sync rather than waiting for their next individual moment to shine. Every player feels more connected to the flow of battle, which helps eliminate those lulls in attention that comes from the traditional one-at-a-time turn system. This approach can also be adapted to different encounter sizes. If they're battling a large horde, the faster-paced system prevents the fights from being bogged down into a slow, round-after-round slog. There's always a debate among D&D players about which aspect of the game is more fun, combat or roleplay. Some players love the tactical thrill of a well-fought battle, while others live for the deep character moments and storytelling outside of combat. But what if you didn't have to choose? I encourage you to mix them together. Role-playing during combat can elevate the experience for everyone at the table. While the structured rules for combat can make it feel like that's what it's all about, numbers and mechanics, it is 100% possible and incredibly rewarding to infuse roleplay into those action-packed moments. Doing so can keep combat fresh, give a personal touch, and create memorable moments that go beyond the dice roll. Let your players get creative on how they approach their attacks. Encourage them to make up named attacks and signature moves, or have them engage in some banter with the enemy during the heat of battle. Imagine the fighter shouting, "Taste my steel!" before unleashing a massive strike, or the rogue taunting the enemy with a clever quip as he strikes from the shadows. These small touches add flavor and personality to combat, making it feel less like a numbers game and more like an extension of the character's stories. As the DM, you can take these steps to encourage roleplay during combat. One way to do this is by rewarding creative roleplay with in-game benefits. For example, if the player comes up with a clever line or intimidation tactic during the fight, give them advantage on their next attack. Maybe they convince the enemy that reinforcements are coming, or they bluff about a hidden trap, causing the enemy to falter. Suddenly, the fight isn't just about who has the highest damage, it's about wit and creativity to outsmart the opponent. You can also offer inspiration dice when players engage in roleplay that adds the battle's atmosphere. Imagine one character cheering on the ally from the sidelines, giving them a motivational boost that earns your players a bonus on their next roll. These little interactive moments weave roleplay into the fabric of the fight and make characters feel more connected to what's happening rather than just going through the motions of combat. Not only does this keep things dynamic and engaging, but it also makes the characters themselves stand out during battle. Instead of just focusing on how much damage the paladin deals or how effective the wizard's spells are, the personalities of the characters start to shine. The barbarian's war cries, the rogue's sly remarks, and the wizard's commanding presence all become part of the narrative, blending combat and storytelling into the seamless experience. And the best part, this role-playing during combat naturally flows into the larger story. Maybe the villain remembers the taunt the fighter threw at them and vows to get revenge. Or the party recalls their teamwork with a feast afterwards, recalling the epic moments of battle, not just for their mechanical success, but how they work together as characters in the story. This kind of storytelling enriches the game, making combat more than just an isolated event. They become pivotal moments in the overarching narrative of the campaign. So don't think combat and roleplay as separate things. Blend them together by encouraging creativity, rewarding roleplay in battle, and letting your players' personalities shine. You can create encounters that are not just tactically exciting, but also full of character-driven moments that elevate the story and make the game more immersive for everyone. If you found this video useful, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.